Continuing on with the top 10 best PvE weapons, today we have Dark Souls 2, everybody's favorite game. But these lists are just getting harder and harder to make because Dark Souls 2 just has a lot of really good weapons, and trying to condense it to just 10 is kind of annoying. There's so many amazing weapons that are just not going to make it to the list. But for me, I just picked the 10 most useful ones. And I did try to cover a wide variety. I didn't want to have a bunch of the exact type of weapon, but let's just get into it. Number 10, we have the Mastodon halberd. Now, halberds in this game are just an amazing weapon class. They get really good range, they're relatively quick, and they get amazing movesets. The light attack combo has very good variety, got nice horizontal, vertical swipes, and you do get poking attacks too. The heavy attack is a very solid spin to win, and even the running attack is like a better version of that spin to win because it can hit like up to 3 times. And combined with the range that it actually does get, means that it's really good at crowd control and hitting multiple enemies, and it's also just really good at boss DPS. Now for me, the downsides of halberds is that they can be on the heavier side, and their stamina cost can be pretty high, sometimes on par with like greatswords, even ultra greatswords, and they typically don't get as much poise damage or as much counter damage as those weapon classes. But the range and the movesets is more than enough to carry them. But as for the Mastodon halberd in particular, doesn't get any unique types of movesets, but it does just get amazing damage, gets some of the highest base damage in the entire weapon class, and it probably just gets the best scalings too. You get an A scaling in strength, and even with like all the elemental infusions, you get like B scalings all across the board. It just performs really well. So if you actually want just a regular halberd experience, the Mastodon halberd is probably going to be the best one. Number 9, we have the King's Ultra Greatsword. Now this bad boy is an Ultra Greatsword that gets the exact same moveset as a Great Axe, which typically I don't really like the Great Axe moveset because it kind of lacks the variety, but the fact that you're just going to get Ultra Greatsword damage and poise damage for the speeds of a Great Axe, it's pretty self-explanatory as to why this thing is going to be really good. And it's not like this thing actually has less damage to compensate for its different movesets. In fact, this thing can actually get the highest AR in the entire game, even more so than the Smelter Hammer. If you just put like a lot of points into strength, it can actually outperform it because this bad boy gets an S scaling in strength. And even when you have an elemental infused, it still retains an A scaling. And unlike most of the other Ultra Greatswords, it gets striking damage, which is just much better than slashing damage. Strike damage is like the best damage type in the entire game. Almost everything is just weaker to it. Now, the only downsides that I really can say about this is that it's still going to be on the heavier side, and it doesn't really get as much range as some of the Ultra Greatswords. But I guess like the biggest drawback is that it does actually get the lowest counter damage at 110 compared to all the other Ultra Greatswords. Most of them get 130 or 140, which I guess the fact that it does do strike damage kind of counteracts it anyway. And this weapon also is acquired like towards the end of the game too, but when you do get your hands on it, it is definitely going to be an amazing option to have. Number 8, we have the Ivory King Ultra Greatsword. Now this is obviously another Ultra Greatsword. Doesn't really get like the most amazing base damage, does get split magic damage. Its scalings aren't really too crazy either. Gets very average counter damage for Ultra Greatsword, but there's just going to be a bunch of other things going for it. And that's one is going to be its weight. It only weighs 14 units, which is very light for an Ultra Greatsword. It does also get an amazing moveset. Actually shares a very similar one to the Zweihander. That means you get the good sideward swipes with the light attack combo, a good horizontal swipe with the rolling attack, and you get those solid two-handed poking attacks with the heavy. But yes, the best thing about it is going to be its two-handed moveset because every single swing will basically like turn it into a lightsaber. It'll like extend the range by twice as much with that cool projectile part. Now that projectile part isn't going to be doing as much damage as the regular weapon itself, but the fact that you actually can just do nice damage at a longer distance that actually does stagger enemies, do some nice poise damage too, and it even actually does proc status effects as well, so you actually can just go into a poison infusion, or you can just double down to a bleed infusion because this thing also does get passive bleed. And hitting with this weapon at point blank range is just going to do bonus damage because you're also hitting with that projectile part and the actual weapon itself. Now there are going to be a couple of downsides to this weapon, and that's one, it is acquired like way later in the game, off the last DLC, off the last boss, and it actually does consume a lot of durability. Every single swing will actually decrease the durability by 10, and the fact that you have 200 durability means that you're kind of going to have to stack up on a bunch of repair powders. I definitely recommend pairing it alongside the bracing and knuckle ring to decrease the durability cost by half. So actually might be very annoying for some people, but if you can actually look past that or use ways to counteract it, it actually can definitely be one of the more powerful weapons in the game. Number 7, we have the Old Knight Hammer. Now, Great Hammers in general, I'm not really too big of a fan of. They don't really have as much range or as have as like a unique of a moveset compared to things like Ultra Greatswords, and they don't really get that higher counter damage. But the things that they actually do have going for them is that 1, it does striking damage, and 2, they actually get the highest poise damage in the entire game. So if you actually just want to shred through enemies' poise meter and stagger them really quickly, then Great Hammers might be your best option, of which I think the Old Knight Hammer is going to be one of the better ones because it does get amazing base damage, it doesn't really weigh that much, and you get relatively lower requirements for a great hammer. Only 30 strength is actually really good. That means you only really need to go to about 20 strength, just two-hand it. You get a bunch of nice downward swipes. The pancaking attack you get with the heavy is really solid too. And also the old Knight Hammer actually does get the highest poise damage out of the whole bunch. Now it's not going to perform as well as some of the other great hammers like at 40 strength or 50 strength, but the thing is the fact that it performs so well at lower levels of strength means that you could probably put those points into other stats like your vigor, endurance, adaptability. That means you just get more survivability and enhances your neutral game, and you still get amazing damage. So it's probably not going to be like the best option at really high levels, but just going through regular new game, this thing is just going to be amazing. Now another downside that the old Knight Hammer actually does have is it's really low in durability. It only has 30 durability in total, which means that you're gonna have to stack up on repair powders or actually equip the bracing knuckle ring once again. You could actually just use this as a backup option just to kill bosses and just have like a secondary option that's probably like more lighter, like a regular hammer, let's say. But this thing does actually perform extremely well still. Number 6, we have the Chaos Blade. Now this is a katana of which this weapon class is just amazing. You get pretty quick movesets, good variety of movesets, you get good range, they don't actually weigh as much, and you get amazing counter damage. And with the Chaos Blade in particular, I'm going to like this one the most because it actually just gets insane damage. It's not going to have like the highest base damage, but its scalings are just out of this world. Like it just gets S scaling across the board in dexterity with like almost every single infusion. Regular, fire, lightning, poison, bleed, it does not matter. But for me, the best thing about the Chaos Blade is going to be its movesets. The heavy attacks two-handed are just really nice. You get good tracking. You do get a good follow-up as well. But the one-handed heavy attack is just incredible. It is a very solid poke that comes out so fast. And you can pair this alongside the old Leo ring to just further improve the counter damage. Now, the major downside to the Chaos Blade is going to be the fact that you do take health every single time that you swing. 50 HP. For every single time you hit with this thing, which at lower levels, you're definitely going to notice it being a problem. At later levels, it's probably not too bad and actually can be counteracted with like some health regen types of miracles. But if you are noticing that this thing is just not good for you, you just don't like the health draining mechanic, then you probably can just go with the Uchi Katana. It's not going to have as good as a moveset, nor actually get as much damage, but it can just serve you perfectly fine because katanas are just going to be really good in general. Number 5, we have the Santiers Spear. Now this is a halberd, of which it just works like a regular halberd. You get the same moveset, you get average base damage. It actually doesn't get scalings in any stat unless you have it infused. But the best thing about it is when you actually break it, it actually changes up the moveset. Which when breaking it, it actually still retains really good damage, the same range, the same counter damage, but it just makes it so much faster and basically turns its light attacks into like some cool twin blade type of attack. And it actually still gets the same spin to wins as well that the regular halberds get. So you basically just get the best of both worlds, just a better light attack combo, and you just get the spin to wins. Now, once it actually is broken, this one actually cannot be repaired, which is still perfectly fine because having it broken is just going to be the optimal way to use it. And another thing is that when it's broken, there's no need to worry about its durability at all because there's no way to go down. You can't really get more broken than broken. Now, unfortunately, it still has the downside of just like not getting scalings unless you do have it infused, which the scalings that you do get with an infusion definitely don't carry you very fast. And maybe like at New Game Plus and beyond, you're probably going to notice a little bit of damage fall off. But in regular New Game, this is definitely going to be one of the better options because it's so fast. You can stun lock enemies nicely, you get some good counter damage, and you just arguably get like the best moveset in the entire game. Number 4, we have the Red Iron Twin Blades. Now, the Twin Blade category can be kind of hit and miss sometimes. They do get some very fast light attack combos. The heavy attacks can be okay as well. But typically, they actually have like longer animation with the light attack combos, don't really get as much range, and their DPS is probably going to be outclassed by things like curved swords and thrusting swords. But with the Red Iron Twin Blade in particular, this one just like works a lot differently than the rest. Gets like a much different moveset. Actually is a little bit slower as well. But the trade-off being is that this thing just gets a lot higher durability and gets more poise damage too. To the point that its poise damage is like very similar to like a halberd. And even though the moveset is actually slower, it's not going to be like that much worse than a regular Twin Blade. Arguably, it actually might be a better moveset because it actually does get more variety with like poking attacks as well with its heavy. But this thing also just gets incredibly high base damage compared to all the other Twin Blades. And it gets amazing scalings. You get an A scaling in strength. Almost every other elemental infusion, you just get a B scaling in strength. It also still retains the same amount of counter damage as all the other Twin Blades. And pairing this alongside the Stone Ring, you can actually get almost just as much poise damage as like an Ultra Greatsword. And with how fast this thing actually does attack, you can like stun lock enemies for days and just break enemies' poise so fast. And obviously, it's like very flashy. Twin Blades are just going to be really cool, one of the flashiest movesets out there, which I guess is more than enough reason to want to use it. And I think the Red Iron Twin Blade is just going to be the king of this. Number 3, we have the Craftsman's Hammer. Now, honestly, you can just go with like almost any type of hammer. All of these things are just going to be really good because they all do striking damage and have very fast movesets, which is like the recipe for success in this game. Once again, striking damage is like the best damage type because everything that wears armor is just weaker to striking damage, and everything in the game is just a guy in armor. So it just works. But this thing can actually just output just amazing DPS because it does get faster movesets. It can honestly get just as much DPS as like most great hammers in this game. And those things are just going to weigh a lot more, require more stat investment. They cost a lot more stamina, so you're going to need a lot of endurance, a lot of vitality. And these things can also just poise break, honestly, just as fast because they do get 30 poise damage with every single swing, which is a lot more than most other things that swing this fast. Now, the reason I'm going to pick the Craftsman Hammer over the rest is for a couple reasons. One, it actually does get the highest base damage by a long shot, and it actually also does get the highest counter damage at 130. So with these two things put together, you can just output so much damage so quickly, and even its moveset isn't even too bad either. You get solid vertical swipes, horizontal swipes, get a nice big bonking attack with the heavy as well. It just performs really well. There's like nothing really bad that you can say about a hammer. Like, they're just really good. Number 2, we have the Warped Sword. Now, this weapon is fucking insane. Now, it's a curved sword, which they're probably not going to be like the craziest weapon classes in the entire game. They have extremely fast light attack combos, but the variety of moveset, their lack of good counter damage, and their lack of poise damage kind of makes them like outclassed by something like a katana. But the Warped Sword just says fuck you to all of that shit because it gets 130 counter damage and gets 25 poise damage, which is like way higher than like all the other curved swords. And with how fast that you can actually swing this weapon with its light attack combo, it just makes for a ridiculous combination. It's not like its base damage is that high. It does actually get some pretty decent scalings. So its AR is probably not going to be as high as some of the other curved swords, but like with this high counter damage, it probably might end up being the highest damaging curved sword. And the fact that you're just going to stagger enemies a lot faster with this thing, and the fact that it also doesn't consume much stamina because it's a curved sword, doesn't weigh that much, you could do like everything that you want to with this weapon right here. And also you just get the option of power sensing too, which power sensing curved swords just performs extremely well. The Warp Sword in particular is probably just going to be one of the better ones to do it. So yeah, like this shit's just insane. It's easy to use. You can get it very early on. It can carry you from start to finish. Amazing damage, amazing poise. You just can't go wrong. Number 1, we have the Ice Rapier, or honestly just like any rapier in general because they're all just ridiculously broken. Now the reason as to why they're really good is because they're so fucking fast and have so much counter damage, barely consume any stamina, they all like weigh next to nothing, all are very low requirements, and paired alongside the correct rings, this thing can just output the highest DPS in the entire game, with like next to no downsides outside of the fact that it does not do much poise damage, but with how fast that it does swing, it probably can stack up that poise damage nicely. And I guess it also doesn't get much variety with its movesets because you're just doing a bunch of pokes, so it's probably not going to be the best thing for crowd control, but if you're just killing enemies faster, then it's probably not going to be that big of a deal anyway. Now with the Ice Rapier in particular, this one is just going to be the best because not only does it just output the most amount of damage with like different types of infusions, but it also does get a pretty cool heavy attack. Actually does serve as a projectile, which is not going to get like the most amazing damage, but the fact that you can just pick enemies off at a distance or try and just kite enemies in one at a time, which kind of just does counteract the weakness of the rapier and just crowd control in general. So yeah, just going with any rapier is going to be perfectly fine. I recommend starting off with the regular rapier until you get access to the Ice Rapier. You don't have to farm it, which does kind of suck, but like once you do acquire the Ice Rapier, you have the best weapon in Dark Souls 2. Anyway, that is in fact the list. If you have your own opinions, just let me know down in the comments below. Yes, Dark Souls 3 will be the next one that we actually do end up covering, probably after I finish my sorcery-based marathon, which I actually am live right now on Twitch. You can check me out there. I'll be doing my sorcery marathon, beating every single game only using sorcery spells. I think I'll be playing Dark Souls 2 by the time this video is actually out, so that's pretty convenient. Anyway, catch you guys in the next. Bye!